You've got lots of alcohol markers. Or maybe you're a colored pencil person. Now you're curious about mixing the two.
You should definitely try it. Markers and pencils go great together.
And they're beginner friendly, so it's easy to get in there and experiment. But there are a few things that are just not intuitive. And there are things which sound like they'd work, but usually end up looking, not quite the way you expected.
I've been mixing markers with colored pencils for a couple of decades now, so let me help you learn from my many mistakes.
I've got 5 tips for you today about the quirks of marker and pencil mixed media. But before we start, I need to tell you something, and it's totally not fair. Marker people have a distinct advantage when it comes to learning marker-pencil mixed media.
Now, I'm not trying to discourage the pencil people.
I'm just saying that marker artists don't have to change much about their marker technique to make room for pencils. But if you're a colored pencil person, there's a lot of pencil advice and normal application techniques that you've been practicing.
Unfortunately, you'll need to totally rethink pencil technique to make room for markers.
It's not hard, it's just a different mindset. And this is why most marker people don't need a lot of help adding colored pencils to their routine. Meanwhile, the pencil people kind of struggle. But remember, I'm a pencil artist. Even though most of my videos and classes are about markers, the colored pencils are my primary medium, and the pencils are where I spend most of my time.
So if I can learn to do this, you can too.
Okay, so my first tip is pretty darn simple. It's barely even a tip. But to some of you, it's going to be a total light bulb moment. Ready for it? It's not as much pencil as you think.
See, people jump into this thinking that marker plus pencil equals 50% marker and then 50% pencil.
Or more precisely, people think we're doing a full marker project from start to finish, and then we're doing a full rendering of colored pencil over the top of that. And it's just not. It doesn't need to be 50-50. At best, this daisy here is more like 80-20 or 70-30. There are large areas of this piece with no pencil. And even where there is pencil, most of it is just a whisper.
So this is one of those times where colored pencil technique leads you astray.
You've been told to cover every square inch of the paper with layers and layers of colored pencil. And you've been warned that if you don't, it's going to look gritty and grainy. Now, I guess nobody's going to stop you from coloring everything fully with marker and then doing a big old complicated pencil treatment over the top. But you don't need to. And I think it'll look better if you don't.
Think of the markers as doing what colored pencils can't.
Markers can cover large areas and they can fill spaces faster than 402 layers of pencil. Then think of the pencils as doing what the markers can't do. The pencils can create small details and texture, but they can also enhance depth and dimension by taking the darks darker or making the shady colors murkier.
Just keep in mind that there's less colored pencil here than you think.
Okay, this next tip, it kind of relates back to the first, but let me get a lot more specific. So you'll see people stressing out to find pencils to match every one of their markers exactly. I've even seen charts and swatching videos where they're telling you that R21 equals like 928 Prismacolor Blush Pink or Holbein 022 Petal Pink. Even worse is when they tell you something needlessly complex, like R21 equals a layer of white plus carmine over that and then deco pink on the top.
You don't need to match every marker in a blending combination to a specific pencil.
In fact, I would go so far as to say, if you ever find yourself coloring with a color over the top of the exact same color, stop. There's no point in doubling the color. You don't need it as a base coat, you don't need it for pencil blending, and you don't need it to magically seal anything in.
You don't need it at all.
You just spent an hour coloring it beautifully with marker. There's no point in hiding all of that with pencil. Redundant color is a waste of time. But even if time was no issue, you're actually damaging your project when you double up, same color over same color.
Remember when I said, let the markers do what markers do best?
Well, the reason we love markers so much is because they're vibrant. Marker ink has a gorgeous glow to it. No other medium, not even watercolor, has this kind of potent vibrancy. Colored pencils are dull in comparison. Colored pencils do not transmit light the same way marker does, and they don't bounce light back to the eye as quickly as marker can. And often, colored pencils contain something beyond just the pink or the red or the yellow pigment. There can be white, gray, or even brown pigments mixed into the color formula. Plus, pencils are loaded with wax, oil, and binders.
Colored pencils are less clean and less vibrant, even when you shoot for an exact color match.
So when you hide the marker underneath the same color of pencil, it's kind of like trying to taste the cake underneath a thick layer of frosting, fondant, and hand-piped decorative roses. Some cakes are barely any cake anymore. And the whole point of the project is that it's marker and colored pencil. So don't bury the marker. My next tip will sound familiar to anyone who has taken a colored pencil class or even watched a pencil tutorial. Work in light layers using a very soft pressure. And I know you've heard this advice before, but I'm telling you this for a totally different reason. Colored pencil people are used to working on white paper, so you're very familiar with how each of your pencils looks on white. But if we're coloring the paper first with markers, you're not working on white anymore.
Every colored pencil has a unique amount of translucency or opacity.
Even within the same brand, so Prismacolor Carmine Red is more opaque than Prismacolor Raspberry, but it's more translucent than Deco Pink. They're all the same brand, but completely different opacities. Which all means that the color you see here on the pencil won't be the same as the color that you see on the paper. Pencils look different over marker, often very, very different. Sometimes I think I've picked a good shade color, but on that marker base, it pops forward like a highlight.
Especially in the beginning, you're gonna make a lot of bad pencil choices.
Heck, I make at least a couple with every project. Because every time you change the marker base, you change how your favorite pencil reads on top. So the reason I'm recommending light layers and soft pressure is because this guy here is about to be your new best friend. It's easier to erase and start over if you haven't welded the pencil to the paper. You're going to make mistakes. Don't compound the problem by making those mistakes harder to fix.
The next tip is gonna sound wrong.
But hear me out, because there's some sense in it. Please do not burnish the colored pencil. I know. Half of you just spit your Diet Coke all over the screen.
Did she just say no burnishing?
And the other half of you are waiting for the colored pencil gods to strike me down with a lightning bolt for not burnishing.
I'm not standing next to her.
But burnishing your mixed media projects is a bad idea.
First, there are 3 ways to burnish, and none of them are good for marker layers. So you can burnish by pressing really hard with a colored pencil, which violates tip number 3. You know, that erasing thing that we just talked about? You can also burnish by using light pressure but building up layers and layers and layers until the paper just can't take any more pencil. But that violates my tip about not hiding the marker. And C, you can burnish with a chemical solvent, but solvent's going to damage the marker layers. So burnishing is problematic for mixed media, but there's another reason why I object to it. See, burnished pencil has a slight sheen to it. Burnished areas are glassy and smooth, and sometimes they can look almost wet. Burnished areas reflect light at certain angles. Now imagine if you bought an expensive black car and then I spray painted just the driver's door with matte black spray paint. It's going to stand out, right?
Even if the blacks physically match, they won't look like the same color.
Shine changes how we see color. Burnishing will always look like a mistake if it's surrounded by non-burnished areas. And vice versa. One little unburnished spot will stand out and grab attention because it's the only thing that doesn't belong.
If you're gonna burnish, you gotta burnish everything.
It's just easier not to burnish at all. Okay, so that's 4 of the 5 tips. So far we have, it's not as much pencil as you think. You don't have to go over every bit of marker with a matching colored pencil. Actually, it's better if you don't. Don't press so hard that you can't erase. And 4, skip the burnishing. Now, my final tip is one that your average colorist won't know anything about, and honestly, most pro artists wouldn't even think to mention this.
But because I teach art classes, I can't not include it.
Beginners always wonder,
How much shading, highlights, and details should I do with the markers, and what should I save for the pencils?
well, there isn't one best answer for everyone on this. You can do as much marker or as little marker as you want. Just as an example, I have 2 mixed media courses. We focus on markers in the blend and we focus on pencils in the point, but we do markers and pencils in both courses.
Anyway, in both courses, we start with very simple marker layers. And then as the lessons progress, we add more and more marker.
So in your own artwork, on your own, at home, you can do really advanced marker rendering, or you could base coat every shape with just one single marker color. It's all up to your taste and style. Both approaches totally work.
But the teacher in me really thinks that you should do more than just a simple marker base coat. Here's why.
When you color something fully with markers, meaning that you do all the shading, you do the blending, and you save room for highlights, when you're doing all of that, you're doing a lot of thinking. You're exploring the shape and the form of the object. You're thinking through where the shade sits and where the lights and the darks are, where the object rises and where it falls. Then later, when you're deciding where to put the pencil, you do all of that same thinking all over again, but better.
If you just base coat everything with a simple layer of marker, you're really not thinking much about the 3-dimensional form until you pick up a colored pencil.
It's a wasted opportunity. The more you think about the shapes you're coloring, the better you'll color them, and the faster you'll learn and grow. From an educational standpoint, you will learn more and see greater skill improvement if you double the thought process.
Now, that's not to say that I always do a full rendering with the markers.
Sometimes I shortcut it. Sometimes I save elements specifically for the pencils. But right now, when you're first starting out, make the most out of every project by giving it more time and thought. In the short term, your projects will look better, and in the long term, coloring will get easier. Double think it. It's worth it. For more info about today's Gerbera Daisy project, check the resource link in the description. And to learn how I use colored pencils to change the color of my markers, check out this video here.